What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the No Starving Artist podcast. Very, very awesome episode today. We got an in-person guest, which doesn't happen very often. And we're nearing the end of season 2 as well. So if you're watching this episode, chances are, hopefully, you've watched the other episodes in this season. And we're getting close to the end of the line. But we've got an amazing guest who reached out to me directly through some mutual friends, Ryan Visconti. And he is the owner and founder of the Eximo project, which we're going to be talking about. But I think there's a lot of parallels that we can definitely talk about in terms of movement, which is something that he specializes in. So Ryan, go ahead and introduce yourself. Give the people a little bit about you.
Yeah, my name is Ryan Visconti. A lot of people in the dance community know me as AZ. I founded the Eximo project in 2014 in February. Since then, I've just been doing workshops all across the country. I work with universities, private studios, one-on-ones, just kind of wherever the teaching brings me. A lot of focus as of late has been universities in specific, and I'm actually working on being at a university full-time as of fall. So yeah, that's kind of where the journey is at right now.
That's dope. That's really, really dope. It's an interesting space because I feel like, and if he bugs you too, you can.
No, it's good. You have two guests.
For anybody watching, this is very strange that my dog is sitting on his lap like 5 minutes after he walked in the door. This is not a normal thing that he does. So, but I also scared the crap out of him right before we started rolling. So it's kind of my fault. But no, I feel like there's there's obviously like dance as a whole. And then there's all these weird kind of like segments of the dance industry that don't always overlap. And I think sometimes people don't even realize how disconnected is not a good word, but just not connected they all are. Like the collegiate route of things versus like the freestyle community versus like the competitive dance studios. They're all within the same kind of beast, but there are people that are like just in certain segments, and that's the only places they exist. And it's always been interesting to me. But so what was kind of the spawn of, well, let me ask you this. What was your first like style? I know that's such a mad, I hate when people ask me that, but what was the first style of dance that you like were really drawn to?
Are we talking like physicality, like movement arts as a whole, or just dance?
Dance. Both.
From a dance perspective, I would just say hip hop.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Just kind of like East Coast bounce hip hop.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then when did you start, when did the movement stuff come into play for you?
The movement stuff came into play when I was getting really good at battling, and I was getting higher and higher in tournaments. And I felt it was kind of the next necessary route. You know, you had talked about something, and you had said that use the term segmented. I would use the term fragmented. I think it's one and the same.
Yeah.
You know, with Eximo, the idea, first and foremost, Eximo is an approach, and it's the aim of Eximo to put the practitioner first, right? Whereas typically it's whatever style you learn first and the practitioner second, right? Because you're paying tribute to that style you're learning that way. And so I think what happens over time is there's a diminishment of return if you stay in one style for too long, but you're seeking to venture out. And Eximo focuses on identifying and isolating principles that run congruent through different movement arts, and then I shape exercises around those principles and introduce them to students.
Yeah.
And so to kind of answer your question in a long way, I didn't feel that there was that at the time. I didn't feel that there was anything that I was looking at guys like Ito Portal, who I was a huge fan of. I still am, but back then was a massive fan of. And he's done, in terms of movement culture, I probably couldn't think of anyone who's had a bigger impact. But Ito's work didn't really deal with anything rhythmically. And I feel that rhythms in general, regardless of the art, is the best way to imbue new movement patterns and skills, right? So if you want to learn a new skill, I think a real core of learning it is to learn it in a rhythmic component, because I think your nervous system has an easier time absorbing it than if it becomes like this singular repetitive way like you would do with weightlifting.
Okay. I have so many questions. Explain that though. Dive a little bit deeper into that for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of taken for granted how the nervous system, and as I've just seen from empirical evidence, retain new information.
Yeah.
Right. So when people often train things, it becomes very repetitive, and it's reps and reps and sets and sets.
Yeah, for sure.
But I don't think that is the ultimate way. I don't think that's the end all be all. And I also think that's only one cornerstone in a bigger piece of learning a move.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think another great example is fighters, right? Everything, especially when you look at mitt work and pad work, all of that's very rhythmic, right? And it translates out very well into not just their art, but other arts.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at it in reverse, it becomes also very apparent. I think you look at like weightlifting cultures and gymnastics cultures, even gymnasts, I think rhythmically, sometimes when I look at them in other environments, there's much more of a struggle. And it's like they have all the abilities. They have the strength and the flexibility and the coordination, but the rhythmic component is lacking.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm like processing this.
Good.
No, because I agree with what you're saying. And I think too, what's really interesting is that like, I don't know. I feel like when I started having these conversations with people, it was really, really clear to me. Like I started just believing in kind of like synchronicities and just things like that a lot more because the people that I was just unintentionally having conversations with were like very aligned or very like shared very similar things with what I was going through at the same time. And it's been very strange. And so that's what interests me so much about what you do is that I have also in the past couple of years really made this shift towards, like focusing more on movement and focusing more on like dancers really understanding like how they're moving. And I think also it comes from the fact that like I tend to work with a lot of technical competitive dancers and I'm not a technically trained dancer by my history. And so I think my approach has been forced to be that because I don't have all that repetition in terms of like technicality.
Okay.
So when I'm watching these kids and seeing what's going wrong, I feel like I'm seeing things that are different than what another teacher might see because I'm not looking at it from that repetitive standpoint. Yeah. And so now I'm kind of like, I don't know. Now I'm like interested in this like rhythmic idea because it's like maybe that like I totally understand what you're saying.
Well, and there's a lot of merit to what you're talking about in your journey because I think it's much more advantageous as a practitioner to base yourself on your weaknesses rather than your strengths. And so
interesting. Okay.
Right. A lot of people, I think, just kind of gravitate towards their strengths and it's natural because that's what the universe gives you food pellets for. You're like, oh, people know me for this. This is what I'm going to do more of.
Yeah.
But I think on a practice level, I think on a spiritual level, eventually there becomes a halt, right? Because you've invested in something that was already, somewhat God-given. And then you have these other avenues of yourself that if you would have invested in, then it would have created a bit, a larger pie in general, if you will, right? And you could even argue that if you already had those skills and they were God-given and they're really easy to do, well, then just maintain them. Why? If you're already at a super high level with it, just maintain it and then work on the other stuff.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about teaching, I think that's really important because when you base yourself in your weaknesses, I think it not only makes you more an effective practitioner, but a teacher. Right, because then you have to really dissect and reverse engineer everything. Yeah, because you're like, well, I suck at this. That's me and all my stuff. I was known as like all these like upper body calisthenics, like all these crazy feats, like one arm chin ups, all this stupid. I think it's ridiculous at this point in my life. But when I did them all, but I had none of those. I mean, I started out not being able to do 5 pull-ups.
Yeah.
And it was just 8 years compounded over time, and it helps because then I understand the whole not just the mechanics, but the biomechanics of pulling. Yeah. On a level that's much different on an 8-year span. But I do think that has a lot of a benefit and a positive impact on the community when teaching.
Right. So when you're going into, so you're here in Utah, obviously you were just working with a studio. When you go into a group and you work with them, what does that look like? Is it different every single time? Is there certain things that stay consistent? What is your kind of protocol, so to speak, of when you go and work with a new group?
So each year I need a little water. I don't want to move too much because of everybody.
No, you're fine. You can really push him off too. He'll just come to me.
We're bonding now. So to answer your question, each year I have a new syllabus that I put out.
Okay.
So what I just started teaching this year, to put it in perspective, is 3 types of foot placement in relation to your center line.
Okay.
Right. So
okay.
opening access to your center line,
Yeah.
closing access to your center line, and running parallel to your center line.
Okay.
And that's typically the first half of class if the class is long enough.
Yeah.
And then the second half is exploring unconventional axes of balance, typical axes on a diagonal.
Yeah.
So like where people normally move through space and time, up, back, side to side,
Yep.
we take these axes and we turn them like this.
Got it. Okay.
And then the major instrument currently that I use to explore those axes are backbends and bridges.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I try to make the class also very physical.
Yeah.
You know, because the kids definitely gravitate towards the more of a physical challenge.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so that's why the backbends and the bridges part. As the
Got it.
tool. Yeah.
How do you not so I'm the least prepared teacher of all time, I think,
Okay.
or at least one of them. How do you like, do you get bored of the process? Like in my head, I'm like, if I put together a syllabus, I feel like the second time teaching it, I'd be like, nah, I'm over it already.
I would know.
Or is it because it's so different every time you employ it?
I think, right, to me, the syllabus really starts the first time I teach it. So because of that, from January 1 to December 31st, by December 31st, it's very well refined. And so I enjoy because, especially if you get students that ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Even if students are like kind of difficult, I enjoy that capacity where there's almost like a little doubt because it checks and reinforces.
Yeah.
You know, the amount. So that's what really keeps my interest in it.
So the variability is in the progression of the syllabus.
And I'm working with all these different student bodies. So to see how it works on a collegiate level versus how it works in like a 6 through 11 bracket, you know, and how to also scale the teachings. So we're getting the same point across and it's equally challenging among all those different demographics. Yeah, is what intrigues me the most.
Got it. Okay. Okay. And so how do you, so we jumped forward a little bit. That was my fault, really. So you start getting interested in movement. You start realizing this kind of like rhythmic nature of things. How does it, like, where does it go from that point to the Eximo project? Like when you first did the first syllabus, like what was the evolution from the point you started realizing that this was a thing you wanted to invest time and energy into? And then when you actually kind of like materialized it into like, let's teach people this now.
Yeah, so in 2014, I was kind of like at the peak of my battling, and I was like, I'm going to move to New York. But that's where I was born originally. Okay. I'm going to move, or I should say back to New York. I'm going to move to New York and really go to the source of it. And, learn from the OGs and all that stuff. Yeah. And so I had got there, and I was just very uninspired. I really didn't... especially from, not necessarily from a music appreciation or a cultural appreciation, even rhythmically I appreciate it, but definitely within the movement patterns I didn't enjoy it a lot. And so I was like, well, I don't really know what I want to do. And so I was living in my aunt's basement at the time, and I had come up with something called rhythm bending. Okay. And rhythm bending wasn't any type of floor work or any type of calisthenics, really wasn't very physical at all. It was all really the rhythmic component that we're talking about. Yeah. And so within rhythm bending, there was an offshoot. And so I taught rhythm bending maybe for like a year or two. Yeah. And within rhythm bending, I was doing this side project called the Eximo Project. Got it. Okay. And that's just kind of where that took off. Because floor work at that time was very early. I mean, we're talking 2015, 2016. So it was early. It was recognized early. I also think with rhythm bending, a lot of people thought it was like a music class. You know, when I said it to the general public. Yeah. Right. So that's fair. Okay. Eximo means release in Latin. Got it. Okay. And because it was its own word, it also just made people stop and be like, well, what are you talking about? Right. For sure. So from a marketing standpoint, it made more sense. I really wanted a more physical practice at the time. And it was ultimately the area that I felt I could help with. Yeah. I think, I rhythmically and what I understand, if we're just talking from dance and rhythms, I have friends that I think are much superior in their understanding. So I don't even think I would be the best, but if we're talking within movement patterns, that's kind of where I found my home. Got it. Got it. It's very interesting. It's an interesting like journey, and I think it's funny because we're sort of the antithesis of each other in a sense. Like
if I could never do floor work, that would be the route that I would take. Like it's like the bane of my existence. Like, I get there and I have no clue what to do with myself. So I think that's
funny.
Yeah, it's amazing. Okay. And so yeah, it's bad.
Some people do really avoid it like the plague though.
It's terrible.
Yeah, some people I see them like,
I don't know if it's like, I blame it on my size, but then I'll see bigger people do floor work and I'm like, oh, well, I guess that's not it. But I don't know. It's just like, I don't know.
It's definitely just movement background. I think an inclination for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't do it. So it's like, go figure.
Break the ice. Yeah. I get that. Yeah.
Yeah. So at that point, did you stop? Were you still battling? Were you kind of done with that portion?
This was a point in my battling career I really regret, and I stopped battling.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And I think in hindsight, I wish I wouldn't have stopped.
Why?
Too much loss of skill over time. And I'm not bragging, but I was fairly ahead at that point.
Yeah.
You know, just in my approach to the music and my movement choices, I was always seen as like very different. I could always kind of like turn a room inside out.
Yeah.
And I think I wasn't fully appreciative of that, and I wish I would have ran both simultaneously. So from about 2016 to maybe 2021, I maybe battled 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Whereas before I was literally battling every month. Any state I could go to, I would just
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it is definitely very. It's just a whole separate set of skills outside of like your movement itself. Whatever you're like,
for sure.
Whatever you're good at, like battling is a whole different. It's a whole nother set of skills on top of that, and it's kind of like, the more you do it, the more comfortable and honed those get. And it is sort of weird. Like, I don't know if you feel like this, but I very much feel like this, where it's not like dancing. I feel like I can leave and come back to it, and it doesn't change that much for me.
Okay.
But battling, I feel like when I go back to it after it's been a while, it's like just as terrifying as it was the first time that I did it.
Okay.
Like it feels way foreign to me every single time. I don't know. It's weird.
I don't know if every time I've stepped away, it's felt foreign. You know, I think the thing that I enjoy with battling and the reason why I'm at this point, I'm very engaged.
Yeah.
Kind of back, not fully back to where I was, but pretty active.
Yeah.
And the reason I enjoy it a lot is because it's, battle culture, street culture is really just built on respect. There's not a ton of money in like battling and things of that nature.
Right.
So when you're really one of the top guys out and really putting in work, or people just really realize that you're about it, I think there's a certain gravitation.
For sure. Yeah.
And, ultimately coming from street dance, that really matters to me. I didn't, at the time, as I said, I kind of took it for granted. And I was like, well, I didn't really think of the impact it would have had on me spiritually. But yeah, so that's why I kind of came back. In terms of the nerves, I don't know. I mean, I think with battling, it's been kind of whatever. The more I involve myself, not just in battling, but I realize that the dance comes from other social aspects. Like if I go out just to ciphers or parties or training sessions, that makes the battling easier because I just realize it's a smaller piece in a larger pie. Yeah. But the problem now is, a lot of people, there aren't really training sessions that much. A lot of people don't go out. So like battling is like it. And to me, that would seem terrifying. Like if
that's a very fair point. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Especially because when you go out and it's not like, you're not like forced to like battle. People just, you're just getting down.
Yeah,
like you're just
it's
dancing.
Totally different. Yeah.
Right. And then when you're like, well, I just had this very euphoric feeling where there was no judges, no pressure, no nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And then 3 days later you have a battle. It's easier to recall that feeling of euphoria because you're like, it's the same dance. Like, why is this any different?
Yeah.
And so now I'm always kind of like, even if I go out and it's just for an hour, even if I like turn on the music and get down and it's just for 30 minutes, like just to kind of always just like touch the source.
Yeah.
Because I really want to go back to being able to, manage both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or just, I just say all in one. I didn't even want to put them like this.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I can dig that.
Yeah.
So and now I'm like, I feel like we have this good through line that's happening of like the progression of eczema, and I keep taking you off topic. But I like that we're going back to it every time. So how did you decide, like, I guess my question is, were you hesitant to go into studio spaces? Had you been in those spaces prior to Eximo Project? And what was that like for you?
A lot of rejection.
Yeah.
I mean,
just because they didn't know what it was, like because it was foreign, or
I think. Okay. I mean, so first and foremost, I think I'm kind of like a glutton for punishment. I think that just from an upbringing standpoint, I don't really I almost like gravitate towards rejection. It sounds unhealthy, so that I really wasn't like fearing the rejection.
Yeah.
You know, if anything, I enjoyed that. I knew it would be such a big task.
Got it.
I knew it was going to be. Now, in terms of the reception, I think I had a whole plan. So my plan was to teach in a set amount of private studios, ideally across, I think the number I gave myself was 8 states. Mm-hmm. Like I want to be able to get to 8 states.
Yeah.
And then I want to go anywhere though. I don't care where I went. I just want 8 states.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to go to one of the top performing art schools, which is in Las Vegas, Las Vegas Academy. And I wanted to teach there. I wanted to kind of use that as a springboard to get to the next educational spot.
Got it. Okay.
And so I did LVA and then a series of other high schools. And then I got to Idlewild. I don't know if you know what Idlewild is.
It sounds really familiar.
It's in California.
Okay.
It's like up in the mountains, extremely affluent. It's like it's a charter school, the term on this boarding school.
Okay.
It's like a boarding school because it's like up in the woods.
Interesting. And it's like performing arts, or?
Yeah, and it's like the top school in the nation for performing arts.
Huh.
I mean, out of a student body, I remember when I was there, 50% of the student body was from 23 different countries.
Holy cow. That's crazy.
Yeah, so that really... Then after that, my goal was, okay, now you've taught the top high school nation, let's branch out to universities. Mm-hmm. Again, don't care at what rung, but let's just go up.
Yeah.
Right. And then, I've been very fortunate to teach at universities like Alvin Ailey and NYU and Berkeley.
Yeah.
Berkeley, I just actually did in November. That was a blast. And that was kind of the progression to get it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, you're just emailing these places, you're calling them like, what?
Like a fiend.
Okay.
Yeah, not to the point where it's annoying.
Yeah.
But I've been told I'm extremely tenacious.
Okay.
Yeah, because typically it's always like I'll like reach out and then I probably won't reach out for another, I don't know, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months.
Okay.
Depending on the level of interest.
Yeah. You
know, if you don't acknowledge me at all, I hit you back in 6 months.
Yeah.
If you acknowledge me and go, hey, maybe now's not a good time.
Yeah.
I'll hit you back in 3.
Okay.
But I am constantly on like that.
Yeah.
You know, and so, but to kind of answer your question, going back to in terms of like rejection and how people took it.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of what, Steve Jobs has that thing where he says, or I don't know if he said it, but it's in the movie where he goes, people don't know what they want until they see it.
Right.
There's something along that extent.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt that way. I go, once people see it.
Yeah.
There will be people be like, oh, that's interesting. And then I'll be able to build off that momentum. And certain people are still hard about it, but yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so were you, at this point or even early on, were you starting to see the power of like referrals within these spaces? Like once you were getting into certain spaces, was it easier to get to the next kind of rung of the ladder?
I wouldn't say referrals, but I would say, I don't know if maybe notoriety or just accolades would be proper.
Yeah.
Yeah, because once you start saying that, like, oh, I just taught here.
Right,
it becomes an easier sell.
Yeah.
Right, especially if, not even just going up. Maybe if, I just taught at Berkeley and I go to a local studio and I go, hey, I just taught at Berkeley. I have this great syllabus. I'm working on concepts XYZ. I'd like to teach it at your studio. Yeah.
And this is, so I didn't tell you this in the beginning, but so No Starving Artist, the reason that I started this podcast was to hopefully provide value to all different people within the dance spaces in terms of like how they can kind of get to where they're wanting to go and how they can like figure it out. You know what I mean? Because I just feel like it's kind of a tricky thing to navigate sometimes. So I'm making some assumptions here, but I'm curious. So in the beginning, were you very keen on how much money you were charging? Were you...
No.
Or were you just like, I need to get in and then we'll figure that out later?
The latter.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily, right? I mean, I think when you look at businesses in their initial stage, right? First is if you want to go talk about the business route, is one is I don't think a lot of businesses are profitable early on if you're treating it like a business.
Interesting point. Okay. All right. Yeah.
2 is I think it's how do you want to spend your money? I had thought this. at the time, a lot of people were spending money on Facebook ads and things like that. And that wasn't a bad time for Facebook ads either.
Yeah.
However, I felt that where I was, what I was teaching, I was like, it's not going to mean anything. I go, if it's me doing these moves in a video and I put out these Facebook ads about how I can train you, I go, that doesn't matter. I go, so I'd rather take that ad money to possibly cover any gap in what I would want to get.
Okay.
At a workshop, right?
Yeah.
So if I want X amount of dollars and the studio's like, well, I don't even know if you're going to be any good. You're only worth Y.
Yeah.
I could take that additional money that would really be marketing money, right? Yeah. Because then when I go there, I film a ton of content. I put together these trailers, and then people are like, oh, like this is like a thing.
Got it. Okay.
That makes a lot of sense. That's how I got to because I didn't think I had like a marketable product on the internet.
Yeah.
Even as I'm talking about it now, right? It requires a full conversation. So,
it's not like a for sure.
Right.
Okay.
So to have like some 15-second snippet on the internet, I didn't think was really going to benefit me. So that's how I kind of bridged the gap to getting to where I'm in a place now where I'm happy with what I'm doing. Yeah.
And where did that IQ come from? Like what is your what's your not dance background? Like how did you even have the kind of like, a lot of dancers don't think about that side of things.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what was was it just natural? You just or was there something that kind of spawned it for you?
I mean, I've always had a lot of different business backgrounds, yes.
Okay.
I mean, even today, outside of Eximo, I have other businesses. So yeah, there's always been, but I've always just been very inclined, I think, obsession isn't probably a healthy word to use, but whenever there's a problem in front of me, I feel that I'll deploy as many creative tools and resources and time even to really solve that problem. Yeah. Especially if the universe is feeding me back a little. If people are starting to go, oh, that's interesting, and what about that? So then it even fuels me more to be like, okay, I'm kind of in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Because I mean, these are very similar things that I did in the beginning and still do. Like I remember putting email lists together and sending out newsletters and all this stuff. And when I talk to dancers now, or when I talk to teachers and they're asking questions, I'm like, well, what are you doing? And most of them are like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, what do you mean? It's I don't know. I think a lot of dancers just, they know where they want to go, but they don't really think about how it takes to get there.
Very true.
So that's what's really intriguing about your story is it makes sense the way you mapped it out. And it's now when you explain it, and I'm sure even for you looking back, it's okay,
the dots connect.
That makes perfect sense. Maybe it didn't totally
at the time,
make perfect sense at the time, but when you explain it the way you just did, it's oh, well, I could do that. It makes sense. So I think that's really cool. So where is this maybe is it's not.
Can I build on this before?
Yeah, go.
So I do want to say, I think one of the biggest things that has brought me a lot of success currently is I say that I strive to build relationships first and I teach Eximo second.
Okay, so this is actually interesting. So what does that look like for you?
Okay, so for even something like email, because I know people put together email blasts and things of that. Everything I do is a personal email.
Interesting.
Well, I mean, because I know that if you use what is it, MailChimp or
yeah.
Right, a lot of those go to spam. So that was my fear one.
Right.
And two, I mean, when people really go oh, it's my first name, and if I reference something on their website, they go, oh, this isn't a fake email. So even little things like that, I had done a workshop so when I did Berkeley, you want to jump, Loki? Jump and ship. When I did Berkeley, I did another workshop in New Hampshire.
Okay.
And I was doing a workshop on, maybe it was Tuesday, and they had invited me to come out to their show on Sunday. Now, logistically, it really wasn't beneficial because I had my dual aunts, their twins, 80th birthday party, and I was in upstate New York.
Yeah.
But I knew that if I took the time, right, to go to the show, and go out of my way, they'd be like, "Oh, this dude," and that's the first thing they said when I walked in the door. They're like, "Wow, we're surprised that you even came."
Yeah.
Right, and then it really becomes, and I like that stuff. I didn't just do it strategically. I did that because I really, chances are now I'm going to work with that school in June when I just worked with them in November.
Yeah.
Right, and I think things like that really go a long way. When I taught at LVA, every spring, fall, winter, all those shows I went to.
Yeah.
Some of the time I even paid for my tickets. I was like, you don't need to comp my shit. Like,
Yeah,
I'll just go. Right. And I think those are really, especially if you're dealing with people who are really, have their ear a little more closer to the ground and are looking for people like that, even if they're not. But I think either way, it's a good building. So that's kind of what that looks like for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, really interesting. And I think it's like, I really hope that people are listening and like really taking in what you're saying, because it's I don't know. I think it's one thing I've been telling like senior dancers recently when I talk to them about like what their next steps are is like that it's so much more than the dancing. Like when you're talking about like actually, for lack of better words, monetizing on your craft, but even just general success in life, it's so much more than just what you're good at. It's those types of things as well, like your interpersonal and like your follow-up and your initial reach out. So it's really, really interesting to see like all of those things in like one package, the way with what you kind of do. So it's really, really cool.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, going to the younger generation, I think that's something that's really common now is, people will, like you DM people and they just like the comment, and people post videos and they don't even acknowledge any of the comments, things like that. And to me, those are real opportunities. When I go to, like, let's say any type of kickback or session, even if I'm one of the more higher tier dancers, I'm getting down with anybody.
Yeah.
Like I'm chopping it up with anybody. And I think those are just, it's just, and it's a side of just, I mean, success in business is success in life.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, for sure.
Yeah. So where is this is where I was going to go, and this kind of feels like an end of the episode question, but it's not, what are your eyes on now?
Sure.
Universities you mentioned, but is there something like, do you like the idea of having like a consistent home for the Eximo project eventually? Is it something that you would love to have? Like, is there a grand scheme of like a physical space where it's housed? What's kind of like the master plan? So
those I thought about early on about having my own space. I think I would have to get to a certain point of, I mean, to be blunt, fame, right? If I were to, right? Because there are guys that do that, but I mean, they have like 500,000 Instagram followers, right? And so they'll rent out a studio in New York, and people, because they're obsessed, will all fly into New York. They'll pay a good chunk of change. I also don't know, the more I've seen that, how much I really believe in that.
Okay. So
with that said, maybe that's down the road. I don't know, because that feels as rewarding as it does deceptive. So that's why I'm kind of like, it's kind of like biting the apple. I'm like, I don't know if I want that.
Yeah.
What I for sure want in this moment is to be part of a university curriculum. So you open a university course catalog, and there's Eximo.
Got it.
Then that's what I'm working on now.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, because I think because I'm able to work with all these kids, and typically though they're not for more than anywhere from a single day to a week. Right? I want long-term relationship building.
Got it. Okay.
And so if I'm able to, I mean, the university is the ultimate way to do that.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, every semester it's a new generation of students. A lot of the students that go to these performing arts universities then go on to own their own studios or become directors or faculty or things of that nature.
Yeah.
And then it's a bigger way for me to leave an imprint.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Because my ultimate, I don't know what it exactly looks like at the end, but I will tell you my ultimate focus that I constantly march towards is contribution.
Okay.
So the way I can contribute, that seems, as I'm looking at it, the most plentiful way that I can contribute.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. This is off topic, but I want to go here because I'm really intrigued. What are you seeing when you go into these spaces with dancers right now in this current generation, in this current just time period that we're in, what are some standout things that you're seeing as like consistencies among dancers, whether it's things they struggle with or whether it's just, you know, attitudes in the classroom, et cetera, et cetera? Because your offering is so much different than what a lot of these kids are probably taking. So you probably get a very different side of them
for sure
than a lot of teachers probably don't.
Okay. I mean, I'll say, and I don't want to say this to toot my own horn, my overall classroom experiences are pretty positive.
Yeah.
I don't really have.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's very strong in leadership. If I were to just summate it in a single, I think my leadership skills are very strong because since I've started Eximo, my biggest thing was to always lead from the front. And when I say lead from the front, I mean be able to demonstrate everything, anything. Because I think that to be able to ask someone to do a move is one thing.
Yeah.
But to be able to do it and then do it better than them, and they go, oh, like this is actually possible, and he can do it better than me. So now I have to kind of surrender to the idea of what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I think I'm very physical. I'm very involved. I mean, I would say, to give you an example, like I'll teach like a linear pattern and we'll run it back and cross the floor a bunch of times.
Okay.
And each time before we run it across, I'm demoing.
Yeah.
Right. So I think because I'm always willing to put myself out there first, demonstrate the skill, I'm out there sweating with you. I'm not like sitting on a stool drinking a Slurpee.
Yeah.
You know, and because of, not that I'm saying people are doing that.
People do.
But because of that, I think that's why people gravitate to it. And then you have no choice to be engaged, right? Because everyone's in bridges or dragon squats or handstands. And you look out of place then like twiddling your thumbs because all your friends, and then there becomes, and that's what you really want is a momentum that starts to build to where everybody starts doing it. So there's no room for people to like look around and like not do it.
Interesting. There's so many like very similar aspects to our approach. Besides the fact that you will never ever see me in a back bend, it's not weird. It's just like I think it's so cool, and I think like it helps me understand a little bit more. Like I feel like I've taken your class, even though I've never stepped foot in your class.
That's cool.
Because I get what you're saying. Because I'm the same exact way. Like I like always want to be doing my combos like so I can get that energy, and I also understand how that translates because I've seen it the same way. You know what I mean? It is like and even as a dancer, when I've been in classrooms where the teacher's very involved, it's totally different because the expectation is there without them having to like force it onto you or like place it on top of you. You know what I mean? It's just there because they're doing it and you're like, well, shit, I guess I gotta like, I have to do it too. Yeah,
no, I do. I think, as I said, I was taught that phrase when I first started, lead from the front. And I think it's actually a slogan that they use when they march soldiers into the battlefield.
Okay. Yeah.
In the past, right, the generals were on the field and they'd go into battle before the soldiers.
Yeah.
So the soldiers like, of course I'm going to go into battle. The general does now. But now even in the military, the general dynamic has shifted. Yeah. But in life, I think the way people come from a teaching perspective and lead is kind of different because they sit back a little more. Yeah. And the people who are boots on the ground, I don't think that at their core level that sits right with them. Yeah. Yeah.
Something that I've been running into, I've always ran into it, but I feel like I'm running into it more so than ever, is dancers that just don't, in studio spaces, don't really ever get a chance to just move or like just like whether it's like we put the label of improv or freestyle on it, or it's very, very limited. Do you see that as well? And do you feel like is there a initial hesitation when your class begins, or do you have it kind of dialed in to where you're like you kind of said you're kind of easing them in without them even realizing that they're in it?
So I'll say I'm aware that there is an initial hesitation. Yeah. The way I start my classes and the way the dictation often comes kind of nullifies that feeling. Right? Because I want people to instantly, I just feel comfortable. Yeah. Right? I think the biggest thing is that people feel comfortable making mistakes. Okay. Right. Okay. So I kind of want to lead with this comfortability of we're going to work really hard. Yeah. But it's also going to be very playfully based.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So, because the initial hesitation is always there.
Yeah.
And then there are certain patterns that whenever I release them, it is very interesting because I'm assuming, I don't know if it's, and you know this, I mean, I don't know if it's because of conventions or how competitions are, but there are patterns that it doesn't matter what portion of the United States I teach in. It's just everyone struggles.
Really?
For
Interesting.
sure. Yeah. Anything crossing or spiraling related.
Yeah.
Huge. Because
that's like my number one thing that I tell dancers is like, the way I always verbalize it is like they dance from like the front half of their body out.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
And there's no other like but here's my revelation in the past, like very recently, like a couple of weeks. Because I always I give this critique so much and I'm like, why? I'm always trying to figure out like, why is this happening? And then it dawned on me so obviously of like, it wouldn't make any sense for a teacher, a choreographer, to choreograph the movement of our torso or our head. It would be way too intricate and it would take way too much time, right?
Oh, okay.
So if these dancers are never given the opportunity to play and explore, then they don't even... They're not even realizing that this is not moving because in their heads, they're like, well, I'm doing what my teacher told me to do, without understanding that like this, you have to fill this in. Like you as the individual have to fill this in because the choreographer isn't even thinking about it, because why would they? Like, you know, imagine having to choreograph torso. Like it would take forever and it would never work.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's been this like realization of like, if they don't ever get that opportunity to play and explore, then they literally they don't have the capacity to even do it when they're on stage. And so it's kind of been like an interesting thing of like, I really think that that's where a lot of it comes from. Because studio kids, twisting, crossing. No.
It's the number one thing. And then I've noticed that typically like, so when I teach typically from ages like 11 or 12 to 18, I can teach them the same thing.
Yes.
Before that, I modify it a little. Okay. And the biggest thing I've noticed for the littles is sense of direction. So if I teach a pattern, even if the pattern moves a lot, that's fine. But we have to start and end always in forward orientation. I've noticed that if I ask them to start forward, but let's say they end at a quarter in the back, massive chaos. And something with the littles I like slowly put in. And it's just enough of a challenge. And like today, when we first started doing it, it was probably like a 50% success rate. And by the end, it was like 90. They did really good. But is anything that involves not just spinning, because spinning they're decent at, but spinning towards your backside.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I've noticed because I teach a lot of, I teach a lot of different types of maneuvers that would kind of move towards your back, and specifically one that's called a hook sweep. And I'll see that all the time, that there's this odd processing of just like going that way.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, it kind of makes sense because they're dancing to the mirror so much. And it's like that almost becomes their Bible, is like that connection to the front of the room.
Yeah.
And maybe that plays a role too in just overall movement, because they're so like, even when they're moving, they're tracking themselves in the mirror, and it creates this very unnatural sort of movement quality that isn't real at all. Because it's like, I mean, you wouldn't do that normally.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I would say on an intermediary to low level, typically where people look is where their intent is. Right. So like in fighting, where people look is where people punch. Yeah. Right. But on a higher level, people will look in another area and strike in another area. Right. And you see with dancing the same. And so that's the problem with the mirror, is sometimes like the mirrors will be on the side, but the pattern's running up and down, and your orientation needs to be forward, but because you're checking yourself out in the mirror, it throws off the orientation.
So if for somebody listening that's like, okay, Ryan, I love this, I think this is great, where do they start? Is there a starting point, like aside from finding you and coming to one of your workshops and coming to one of your, bringing you out, for a dancer that maybe doesn't have that access, where's somewhere they can start to play and explore and like, do some of the things that you're speaking of and teaching?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is make your practice manageable so it's something that you can tap into often.
Okay.
Right? Because the first thing is just to be able to show up every day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of people struggle with that. Like they say, like the people who have trouble going to the gym, the whole thing, like put your shoes and your gym clothes at like the foot of your bed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
right. The first thing I would say is to make your practice so you want to show up every day.
Yeah.
Now do whatever you have to do to just get yourself there. Now, in terms of further exploration, I would lean more in towards your fears, what you're more uncomfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
More importantly, I would say typically where there's a little fear, there's also a little intrigue.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would
yeah.
say, because I don't think it's healthy just to explore things that you're afraid of, but where there's things where there's fear, but there's also a little intrigue, those are areas I would lean into.
Interesting. Okay.
And I think you kind of let your practice unfold like that.
Yeah.
And because in terms of like movement patterns, and I mean, you're going to gravitate to what you gravitate to. I mean, one person starts at this point, another person starts at that point. People are good at different things. So I don't think there's like a workout or an art or anything that they can just go to kind of compensate the other half.
Mm-hmm.
I think there has to be an awareness of that component. But those are the two things I would say. Make your practice so you want to show up every day.
Yeah.
And then within your practice, lean towards things that you fear / intrigue.
Okay. I can dig that. Yeah. The first one speaks to me deeply.
Okay.
Just because I'm terrible at I have been saying that I want to get improve just my quantity of movement more, and it's yet to begin. So I kind of come from the opposite end. So for me, I had to learn probably what for some people is a lot easier, and that it's very easy for me to torture myself and make myself suffer. And so when it became oh, you need to work on this because you suck at it, it was super easy. But then the hard part, right, with it was the sensitivity component. Right, those kind of nuances, especially when you're talking about dance as a whole. Yeah, that's kind of where that's where I struggled the most. Yeah. So I just think it's just getting to a place where you're able to identify. Yeah. I don't think a lot of people get to a place where they're really able to identify. People get to a place where they're comfortable, and I use the term a lot of people kind of get high on their own supply. Mm-hmm. And I think the problem with that is that it really takes away from not just your growth as a practitioner, but your growth spiritually. And I also think within your practice, and this is something that's very kind of esoteric, and it's not something that is talked about on a general level, but I will bring it up, is the level of self-deception within people's practices. People reward themselves for things that it's well, you don't need to be rewarded for that. You're already good for that. Move on. Yeah. And I think that creates a falsehood of strength within your practice. Interesting. Right? And so that's where I think it's really important to understand, because I see it with a lot of elite level guys. They just kind of lean into their stronger stuff. Yeah. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but then I see from a practice standpoint, and it's just not what it used to be when they were on the come up. Right? Oh, okay. See what I mean? Yeah. Because there's a certain type of visceral, hunger, sensitive, creative approach that when you're not where you want to be yet. Interesting. Right? But then when you get there, the problem becomes, okay, well, I got there, so now I can't be that anymore. Yeah. Right? So it's almost like the nature of your practice and the desire of your practice has to be perpetuated in front of you constantly. Because the minute you say what you want, you can't possibly want it anymore. Does that make sense? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. So that's what I think. I mean, for me, that's what I reflect on a daily basis. But I do think at the highest level, what I would, for people who are put in a lot of work, that's where I would say. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really, really interesting. I'm unfolding all of that in my brain right now, because I've had similar thoughts about my early years as a choreographer and just a teacher in general. But I always attributed it to, which I do think is a component, is my ego at the time, like my untarnished ego. Like I wasn't because my ego was so big, I wasn't bound. Like nothing could bound me. Like styles couldn't bound me. Like what was right or what was wrong couldn't bound me. And then as I got older and as I started learning more things and learning that like there's a right way to do things or there's a wrong way to do things or like this is not this style or this is not this style, I feel like that everything kind of collapsed. And then it was like, so am I allowed to be creative or not? Was kind of the internal question of like, but I also think that a lot of what you just verbalized was wrapped up in that as well, is that like in the beginning, I wanted like those achievements in the competitive world so bad. And then once I got them, it was almost immediate. Like, oh, now I don't really care as much anymore. So that's a really, really interesting topic.
Yeah, no, I think it's very relatable, especially to people like yourself who have achieved a lot, because you're like, oh, I've come across that feeling. Yeah. And there's that phrase that always goes around, just enjoy the process, enjoy the process. Yeah. And I don't think that's ever really like extrapolated on. Like people say it like it's a bumper sticker. Yeah. Right. And so people are like, oh, okay, I get it. The process. But when you don't really take it into account the blessing and the suffering that can occur at both ends of the spectrum, if you don't really dial it in. Yeah. I think you just get kind of stuck in that rut. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I have kind of like two more things. Yeah. So I'm intrigued music wise. Okay. Is there a certain genre or is music a huge component of your classes? Is it not so much an important component?
Okay. So are we talking like what I get down to personally? Music or in my classes?
Yeah. In your classes. Yeah.
At this point, it doesn't matter. Yeah. I mean, I like bring a laptop to bring it. Yeah. But today I didn't even use it.
Interesting. Okay. That's what I was kind of like wondering.
Yeah. I used to I think because you're like conditioned to think that like music has to be part of it. Yeah. And there are parts like when we do group work, because I'm not just like standing or we're not demoing and things of that nature. I sometimes will play a little music. Yeah. If I do a warm up, I'll do music. Okay. Today I didn't. Today they did like a pre warm up. Yeah. And then because it was group after group, they were warm, so we didn't wind up doing a warm up. Yeah. But it's not really a component for.
Interesting. Okay. What about personally?
Whatever I think so from an enjoyment perspective, yeah, I would say anything R&B, anything that real like gutter, like hood hip hop. Okay. All right. Yeah, for sure. I would say currently what I focus on is whatever music genre I think I wouldn't be good at. Okay. All right. Yeah, which kind of circles back to. Yeah. But so like right now I listen to a lot of clowning music. Okay. That's been my focus. Before that, I was listening to a lot of Midwest, like music that comes out of like Tennessee and places like that. Okay. Just because the way that I would move, I want to be able to express myself so it's adaptable naturally to any rhythm. Yeah. Right. And I feel that the only way to really find my own rhythm and to keep that pure is by constant exposure to different musical rhythms.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense.
What about for you?
Like super indie.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like super indie.
That's what you jam to.
Yeah. I mean, and what I teach to a lot as well. Really? Because I'm in the similar boat as I don't want the music to impede on the class. And what I've found is like, because a lot of my class is like improv movement based. And when I put quick music on or music that has a lot to it, the kids, I feel like they need to do all the stuff and they need to hit all the beats and they need to, and it just becomes like, it defeats the purpose. So I always kind of lead with that is like, I'm going to play slower music. I don't need you to dance any particular way to it. If anything, I want you to kind of ignore it and just use it as background noise. And then, yeah, personally, same thing. I mean, I listen to hip hop like occasionally, but not as much as like, because that's like when I choreograph pieces, it's mainly hip hop. Okay. So it's kind of ironic that I don't really listen to it that much, but I don't know. It's 13 years of like setting hip hop routines and doing like 10 to 15 routines every single year is like, and you imagine like 3 to 4 songs every single routine. It's so much music that at this point I'm like, No.
Yeah, I hear that. I totally
know.
get that.
I don't know. But yeah, so very like indie alternative, like folk type music.
Oh, okay.
My wife hates it, but
Okay.
yeah.
It's like Pine Grove, you know who they are? Is that like considered?
I feel like I know who they are. Like I listen to a lot of Dermot Kennedy.
Okay.
And like Noah Kahn right now,
Okay.
like that type of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. And like I've been getting into like country lately. It's been a
Oh,
weird
you're really down.
it's been a weird
That's what's up,
progression.
man.
It's been a weird progression. But I mean, I'll always like there's still at least once a week where I'm like just throw on like a hip hop playlist and like I'm vibing out to that and like you know what I mean. I think it's like I'll never not. But yeah. So I always like to kind of like rap with like a golden nugget. It's a terrible name for the segment, but it works. It's just very like cliche. But you know, if there was one thing, like if people listening only took one thing away from what you have to offer,
okay,
what would be the thing right now that you're like, this is the thing that I feel like people are lacking or need to work on or could improve on?
Are we talking like a movement practice, or we're just talking like any type of life advice?
Anything.
Oh, that's a big. I mean, if I were to, I would say the biggest thing that I would say is for people to really express what they want. You know, and I think express, you know, what you want, you know, from a business standpoint, what you want from an art standpoint, and not just vocalization where you're like telling people, even if that comes through like symbolism and rituals and you dancing. I think that a lot of people sometimes feel like they don't fit in, but really the reason you don't fit in is because you're not really being who you are. I have never seen someone who's honest with themselves and people go, nah, the hell with that guy. Right? Because even if someone's even if someone has, you know, things you don't like, or maybe a style that you're like, I don't really understand what he's doing, right? If he's consistent in that style and he's always is who he is, and every time you see this guy, he's exactly that, you go, you know what? I don't know if I understand all of his moves, but I respect it. And I think that's much more buildable, circling back to relationship building. Yeah. So I would say just identify what you want and how you feel and just put that forward. You know, which is really hard to do, I think, because everything now is so like value and praise based. You know, and people are even harder. Like I'm the guy at the sessions that goes around and like tells people how tight they are or like what they could work on. Yeah. Or like, oh, when you did this, that was super dope. Or when you did, you know, maybe you could do it that way, just a thought. Yeah. You know, but people don't really go around like that. Yeah. However, I've seen when I start these conversations that people want to say stuff like that. You know, like I'll talk to so and so about this, and then I'll bring it up to a friend, and he'd be like, "Oh, I was thinking the same thing." I'm like, "Why didn't you say anything?" Yeah. You know, I'm like, the kid wanted to hear that. He would have benefited from, because even as an adult, I mean, you know, when there are guys who are world champions, and I'm getting down, and they tell me how much they like my style, you know, I that could be a complete, at one point I was like, well, this could be a complete bomb. They're not going to know what I'm doing. Yeah. Right. But it's to a point where it's respectable. Yeah. And I just think that comes with identifying what you want and putting that first. What about for you? What's your nugget?
Just going to let that one sit. You can't ask me questions.
My bad.
What? I don't, right now.
I thought we were co-nuggeting.
Yeah. Right now. I don't know. I think it's like, I hate to like say that it's in the same vein, but it's very much like, I mean, just in regards to dance, like if you, the thing that I always tell dancers is like, you as like your actual human person is the only thing that nobody else can replicate. So, you know, when I get dancers ask me like, how do I stand out at auditions, or how do I stand out at conventions or in classes? Like, that's the number one thing I tell them is like, it's, you know, you said it in such a really cool way, but it's the same type of energy of like, if you are truly you, then it's going to naturally stand out because nobody else can be that. You know what I mean? Nobody else can do you as good as you can do it. So I think that's kind of like especially right now, and especially where I'm like coming in contact with a lot of these dancers who their biggest problem, I don't love that word, but we'll roll with it, is just their lack of like trust and belief in themselves. And, you know, when you kind of like step back and watch people from that perspective, you realize that there really isn't a lot of difference between great, amazing dancers and good dancers.
No, I totally agree.
It's really just that
agree.
belief in themselves. And so I found myself recently going to these studios and I'm like, these kids are all the same level, but you know, this kid always gets first place and this kid always gets last place, or this kid's, you know, and it's like, and then you start to dig deeper and it's like, well, this kid knows how good they are and they believe it. And this kid doesn't. And so it's like, that's really been what I've been trying to like combat. And I guess my contribution is like, I want people to start believing in themselves a little bit more and just start like owning what they have to offer a little bit more. So I think that's why too, I really, really love your approach and like just the Eximo project as a whole, because I think there's a component of it that embodies that idea of like embracing who you are.
Yo, thank you very much. Yeah.
So that's mine.
I will say, I want to add one more to that, then I know that's the final nuggets.
Go.
Is that was, I was talking about this with the whole transgression of battling, right? It used to be, with battling, it used to be open style, or it used to be all styles.
Yeah.
Right? So you had like style categories, and then it was if you were proficient in that style, and then it was all styles.
Yeah.
And then what really happened is there became so many styles that wound up, because every city that you know, has its own representation of culture, has their own dance style.
Yeah.
So you could then never be an all stylist anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so they gravitated towards open style, which I appreciate. But I don't think that, circling back to what you had said, what's acknowledged is that if you can't be an all stylist anymore, the focus then needs to be your fingerprint. Like, right. I mean, if that's all that's left.
Yeah.
Right, because there's no more pursuit of all these different things, because it's not even possible anymore.
Yeah,
I mean, every 3 months, I feel like I see a new style,
and I feel like that would be a crazy mix of like.
There's some funny memes about that online of like people like switching styles every 3 seconds. It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. It's very, very true. Yeah. And I think as dance gets bigger and bigger, and like as we consume dance more and more, like we already had seen everything, but now we have seen everything 10 times over. So it's like your fingerprint is so much more important than ever, because, you know, we've seen all the stuff. So it's like, what else do you have, you know? So thank you so much. This has been great. This has been awesome.
Yeah,
so
I
really, really appreciate it. Where can people find you? And do you have a website? How do people book you?
So my Instagram is the Eximo Project. So it's the.eximo.project. My website is theeximoproject.com.
Amazing. And everything will be linked. So you're open to travel. You'll go anywhere.
For sure. Anywhere, my friend.
Boom. Yeah. Boom. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.